What if I told you that vampires aren't just a fantasy from horror movies? For centuries, people truly believed they existed. They believed it so strongly that they exhumed bodies, burned hearts, and even decapitated corpses, thinking this was the only way to save their own lives. Watch this video until the end to learn the stories of vampires who really lived. Their nighttime escapades were documented, and local authorities conducted investigations into crimes committed by the Walking Dead. If you picture vampires as elegant, pale aristocrats, handsome, noble romantics, you're mistaken. That image came from writer Bram Stoker and Hollywood, who turned vampires into sex symbols. In reality, they were bloated, rotting corpses, crawling out of graves to spread death. And these creatures weren't just myth. In the 18th century, they triggered mass hysteria across Europe. People in towns and villages were so terrified of vampires that they dug up bodies in cemeteries and drove stakes through them. What caused this widespread panic? Let's dive into the most chilling and well-documented cases of real vampirism. Let's start with one of the earliest and most sensational cases, the one that sparked the entire vampire fever, the story of a Serbian peasant named Petar Blagojević. In 1725, after his death in the village of Kisilova, a wave of sudden and rapid deaths began, 9 people in just 8 days. On their deathbeds, the victims claimed that Blagojević had been strangling them at night. Even his own wife fled to a neighboring village, saying he had appeared to her and demanded his shoes. Terrified villagers turned to the Austrian authorities for help, and what they discovered during the exhumation of Blagojević's body shocked even the official representative of the monarchy, Imperial Provisor Ernst Frombald. The corpse was undecayed. Its hair, beard, and nails had grown, and there was blood in its mouth. The old nails and skin had peeled away, but new ones had formed underneath. In a fit of panic, the villagers drove a stake through the corpse's heart, which caused heavy bleeding from its mouth and ears. Then they burned the body. Frombald's report on the incident was published in a Viennese newspaper and quickly spread across Western Europe, greatly reinforcing the belief in vampires. This case became one of the first documented accounts of vampire beliefs in Eastern Europe, and a key factor in fueling the vampire fever that swept through the 18th century. Just a year later, in the same part of Serbia, another mysterious and tragic story took place, this one involving Arnold Paole, a Serbian rebel fighter. Arnold Paole himself claimed that he had once been tormented by a vampire, and that he cured himself by eating soil from the vampire's grave and smearing himself with its blood. Around 1725, Arnold Paole broke his neck after falling from a hay wagon. Within 20 to 30 days of his death, 4 villagers began complaining that the dead Paole was haunting them, and soon they too died. When the villagers opened Paole's grave, they found classic signs of vampirism. His body had not decayed. His veins were full of blood. Fresh blood was oozing from his mouth and eyes. His shirt and coffin were stained with blood, and his old nails and skin had fallen off, replaced by new ones. Paole was declared a vampire. A stake was driven through his heart, and he let out a terrifying scream, groaned, and bled as if he were still alive. Then he was beheaded and burned. The same procedure was carried out on his 4 supposed victims. But that was only the beginning. 5 years later, in the winter of 1731, a new outbreak began. More than 10 people died within a few weeks. Among the victims were women who, according to locals, might have become vampires themselves. One had eaten meat from sheep killed by the previous vampires, and another had rubbed vampire blood on her skin for protection. To investigate this gruesome case, doctors and military officers were sent to the village. Among the witnesses to the exhumations were Dr. Glaser and surgeon Johann Flukinger. In their detailed reports, they described the bodies as completely intact and undecomposed, plump with red and lively skin, and filled with fresh, unclotted blood. One woman, whom neighbors had known since youth as thin and withered, was found in her grave looking unusually full and well-fed. In the end, the bodies of the suspected vampires were beheaded, burned, and their ashes scattered into the Morava River. The detailed reports describing the case were widely circulated across Europe and played a major role in spreading belief in vampires even further. Even earlier, before the mass hysteria of the 18th century, a case was recorded in Croatia in 1672 that is considered the first historically documented instance of vampirism. Jure Grando Alilović, a stonemason from the village of Kringa, died in 1656, but according to legend, he returned from the grave every night for 16 years to terrorize his village. Jure would knock on the doors of villagers' homes, and within a few days, someone from that household would die. Most horrifying of all, he appeared to his widowed wife, who described him as a smiling and gasping corpse that sexually assaulted her. The villagers tried to kill him with a hawthorn stake, but it bounced off his chest. When they exhumed his body, they found a perfectly preserved corpse with a smile on its face. Eventually, one of the villagers, Stipan Milicic, sawed off his head. The moment the saw broke through the skin, the vampire screamed and blood began to flow from the wound. After the decapitation, peace returned to the village. This case was documented by the scholar Johann Weikard von Valvassor and is considered one of the earliest written records about vampires. By the way, there's a vampire-themed bar in the village of Kringa today, an effort by the locals to attract tourists to the area. But vampire legends weren't limited to Europe. In the late 19th century, the United States experienced its own vampire panic. It was triggered by an outbreak of a deadly disease, tuberculosis, which was known at the time as consumption. The most well-known case occurred in Rhode Island in 1892. Several members of George and Mary Brown's family had died of tuberculosis. When their son Edwin also fell ill, friends and neighbors persuaded George to exhume the bodies, believing that one of the deceased was a vampire draining the life from the living. When the graves were opened, they found that the body of 19-year-old Mercy Brown, who had died most recently, was almost completely intact, and there was still blood in her heart. According to the superstition, Mercy's heart and liver were burned, and the ashes were mixed with water and given to Edwin as a tonic. But it didn't help. He died 2 months later. The Brown family case is one of the best documented instances of exhumation carried out to banish the undead. Some scholars also believe that writer Bram Stoker learned about Mercy Brown's story from newspaper articles and used her as inspiration for the character of Lucy Westenra in his novel Dracula. So what explains all these terrifying stories of vampire appearances? Can the documented cases of the dead rising from their graves really be trusted? Did people actually witness real vampires? Scientists believe that the root of such mystical stories lies in a complete misunderstanding of the human decomposition process. People in those times had no knowledge of what actually happens to a body after death. Modern researchers are convinced that the so-called signs of vampirism are actually just normal stages of human decomposition. For example, a swollen and rosy body can be explained by the buildup of gases that form during decomposition. These gases cause the body to bloat, making it appear plump and well-fed, while also forcing blood out of the mouth and nose, creating the illusion that the corpse has recently fed. The apparent growth of hair, nails, and teeth isn't real growth at all. It happens because the skin and gums shrink after death, exposing the roots of hair, nails, and teeth that were previously hidden during life. Moaning and bleeding when a body is staked can also be explained by modern science. When a bloated corpse is pierced, the built-up gases escape with force, passing through the vocal cords and producing groaning sounds, while any remaining liquid blood flows out of the body. In addition, due to the lack of medical knowledge in the past, people were sometimes buried alive. As a result, scratch marks on the inside of coffins or injuries to the faces of those who had awakened in their graves could easily be misinterpreted as signs of feeding by vampires or desperate attempts to escape. Finally, vampirism was often linked to outbreaks of mysterious illnesses, especially tuberculosis. People dying from consumption would often cough up blood, reinforcing the belief that their life force had been drained by a vampire. Those suffering from rabies were also frequently mistaken for vampires. Their heightened sensitivity to light and garlic, aggressive behavior, and tendency to bite were all seen as classic signs of vampirism. By the mid-18th century, scientific explanations and laws prohibiting the exhumation of bodies brought an end to the mass vampire hysteria. But the image of the vampire didn't die, it evolved. In popular culture, the vampire gradually transformed from a bloated, decaying corpse into a refined, charismatic villain of literature and later of cinema. The impact of these real, chilling stories is undeniable. They laid the foundation for one of the most iconic monsters in horror history, a creature that continues to captivate us with its immortal allure and its reflection of our deepest fears. But that is a story for another time. Do you believe real vampires could exist? Would you ever want to wake up in a grave as one yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes about fascinating and mysterious stories.